Hi, I'm Dr. Shiller, and what you need to know is that the mainstream authorities and mainstream media are not going to protect you from the coronavirus like they should. They are not addressing the complexity of this pandemic, and they're doing things that I see as being potentially very harmful to you and the rest of the public. I've been watching this going on for a while now through the eyes of a extremely well-trained medical doctor who really knows how to think critically about medical research and health in general. And I'm getting pretty kind of fed up with the whole situation, and it's time to speak out about it. The mainstream course of action that most people are following is not addressing the complexity of this problem, and it's potentially harmful to you. And I'm going to give you some food for thought about all of that. And I want to give you some information that could help you empower yourself to survive or even thrive in this pandemic. I've heard a lot of people suffering on both aspects, right? There's an aspect of suffering right now which is clinical. People are getting sick. Some people are dying. Some people are experiencing prolonged symptoms from post-corona syndrome. And on the other hand, a lot of people are sick from the response to the pandemic. The lockdowns, the social distancing, the loss of economic and social opportunities. There's a lot of really bad stuff happening in the world. We are in a crisis. Now look, I am not a political person, and this is not political, and it's not conspiracy oriented. It's really about trying to empower you. I do think that the mainstream authorities are doing a crummy job, but my main point is to give you information so that you can make good choices and empower yourself to actually survive and potentially thrive in a really bad situation. So let's take a step back. In case you haven't noticed, why am I making a big deal about this? We have this coronavirus, and there's a pandemic, and it's everywhere, and it doesn't have a very high death rate. Less than 1% of people die from corona, of the people who get it. And that number keeps going down for a variety of reasons. Some people go on to get post-corona, which can be a really severe sort of dysfunction that happens that can last months, and we don't completely understand it. So there is real pathology happening, and the real pathology is happening because it's so infective. The real pathology is not happening because the virus is dangerous to most people. It's not dangerous to most people, but it spreads very quickly in society. And so the mainstream approach has been, well, let's prevent the spread, and then let's invest billions of dollars in vaccine development, and that's how we'll deal with this problem. Well, that's just upside down and backwards and really, really messed up as far as I can see. And the reason is because we don't know that a vaccine is going to work, and because locking down and social distancing slows the spread. It slows how fast it gets moved through a society, but there's no evidence that it's going to change the long-term number of people who get exposed to corona. There are advantages in the short term, but as a long-term solution, it's probably not going to accomplish anything. And we definitely don't have any evidence that it does anything in the long term, but it causes a lot of economic and social issues. We'll unpack that in a second. So there's huge issues economically and socially. It's no joke. Huge parts of the population in many places are sliding into poverty. There's an increase in mental illness. There's an increase in domestic abuse. There are kids who aren't in school, who are dropping out, who are going to be lost potentially from getting a proper education because they're in formative years where they're not getting it now. They're going to lose their opportunity to be in the groove to get properly educated, and that hurts everybody. The main thing that I want to get at is this, and I'll explain this in more detail. But there's a lot of airspace between when someone gets exposed to the virus and when they get very sick. And our mainstream media and government agencies aren't doing enough to address that. They're missing the boat. There are people who are getting exposed and sick, keeping them from getting very sick, starting early. Lockdown and waiting for a vaccine is stupid, and it's not fantasy, and it's not science-based. It's really a fantasy. Meanwhile, there are things you can do for yourself, and they're not telling you about it. They're not emphasizing that, and they're certainly not putting money into supporting human beings to actually get healthy. And that's what I want to talk about. So let's take a step back and just think about what really happens in an infection, right? We're worried about people getting sick from COVID. The mass majority don't get sick. But here are the steps to a bad outcome. The first is exposure. The second is when there's an infection and it actually gets in and creates a clinical illness. And the third is when that clinical illness goes out of control and basically people get very sick and some die, but some go on to live but are sick for a while. And so this is a virus that's highly transmissible. It's all over the world. The horse is out of the barn. You can't shut the door anymore. Okay, it's everywhere. And distancing and locking down are temporary solutions. You could argue that they help reduce the overload on the healthcare system, and that might be true in places where the virus is suddenly starting to spike. But again, it's a short-term answer, and don't kid yourself that it's a long-term answer. And so the real question is how to keep people from getting severe illness. So let's talk about that. Why does someone get really sick? Let's talk about the biology, right? You have layers of cells called mucosa that line basically all of your orifices, all of your openings. And your mucosa, like in your nasal passages and your throat and your lungs, have very specialized cells. They're immune active, they're a barrier, they're a defense against infection, and certain things get through that mucosal barrier. And when things get through the mucosal barrier, then you often get a clinical infection with symptoms. For some people who never get symptoms, what probably happens is the virus comes into them and either it comes through the mucosal barrier, but it's completely controlled by their immune system, or it just moves through and it sits on the surface and their mucosal system deals with it so they don't get it. And they might get a nasal swab and there's viral particles in there. They might be dead, but it shows up in the PCR and they're not infectious, but they get a positive test. So we're calling that infection without clinical illness. But when people do get clinical illness, that mucosal barrier is compromised. The virus gets in and it creates a local infection. And local infection means inflammation. The immune system gets activated. And sometimes it creates systemic infection. Usually that starts in the upper airways and goes into the lungs. And that's why the main thing people get with corona is pneumonia and all of the things that go along with really, really bad pneumonia. But it gets into other organs too. And one of the effects of this massive inflammation that happens in a very, very small number of people is that it creates a vasculopathy. And vasculopathy is when the blood vessels get sick, you get clotting, you get blood vessels closing off, and that means the organs get sick and die. You get tissue damage because you're not getting enough blood, you don't have exchange of gases, you're not removing waste products, and cells die. And that tends to happen in the lungs, and that's what results in that horrible pneumonia where people can't get oxygenated, and they go on the ventilator and blah, 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 blah. By the way, it looks like early results suggest that they're getting better at dealing with that in hospitals, but that's not what I want to talk about today. But the point is that that inflammation and vasculopathy is what makes people really sick with coronavirus. So the real thing is how to keep people from getting very sick. And there's a lot of room between when someone gets exposed and when they get very sick. There's a lot of things that go on. There's a lot of aspects that are genetic, that have to do with lifestyle, that have to do with the way a person's been living and how well they are, that determines how their body responds. But unfortunately, the main response from the authorities and the mainstream media is vaccine only. A journalist or somebody pressed Dr. Fauci a couple of weeks ago about, okay, what vitamins and supplements do you take? And he was pretty dismissive. He says he takes vitamin D and C, but he dismissed a whole set of other things that actually have proof in a very sort of, not very appropriate way. But they're focusing on a vaccine. And at the moment, there is no vaccine. There's no safe vaccine. There's no effective vaccine. They're putting billions of dollars into developing a vaccine, but we don't know if one is going to exist and whether it's going to work and be safe and be effective. There are illnesses that they've tried to develop vaccines for, and it didn't work. So basically, the whole approach is based on a theory that we're going to have a vaccine. And most of the experts who look at the situation say, if we're going to have a vaccine, it's going to be sometime in 2021. Well, what are we doing until then? We're sitting around and we're waiting, right? There's lots of things that can be done to help people from getting sick. And we're just waiting. You're waiting and you're being helpless. Basically, the approach is sit and lock down and we're going to take care of you with a vaccine, and it's not happening. And so the helplessness feeds into the problem. Okay, so I said there's a lot of room between when someone gets exposed and when they get very infected. And there's two main aspects to that. You may have heard about early treatment, and there are people out there who are proposing various kinds of early treatment. There's the HCQ, zinc, azithromycin thing, Dr. Zelenko, and then there's other more mainstream approaches that are using more conventional medications early when people are first getting sick. We call that early treatment. The idea is right when someone gets sick, start treating them and do things to prevent that inflammatory cascade that results in a whole like conflagration and people getting really sick. I'm not going to talk about that today, although it's worth discussing. I hope to get to that in another video. Today I want to talk about things you can do for yourself, because that's what puts you in the driver's seat, and that's potentially helps everybody. And these are things that you can do without much money, without special equipment, and you can do it at home. So let's talk about that. What we want to do, and look, there is evidence, scientific research, fairly well done scientific research, that shows there's things you can do that are lifestyle oriented that reduce the likelihood of getting infected, reduce the severity of infection, that can enhance the recovery and reduce the amount of time before you recover, and potentially reduce your likelihood of infecting other people. And in the meantime, they also help you feel better in general, and they're part of what's involved in living a healthier life in general. But the mainstream policy and the media are basically feeding you fear. And they're feeding you fear, and the fear is making you feel more helpless. And fear and powerless are no joke. Fearfulness and powerlessness create sickness. I've done a lot of research about stress and things like that. And one of the things they do in laboratory animals, poor little guys, is they give them restraint stress. They take a rat and you put it in a small cage. You give it some sort of shock it can't get away from. Basically, you give it a noxious stimulus in a setting where it has no choice but just to sit there and suck it up. And guess what? You create profound physiologic stress that leads that animal to get sick. So let's just step back here for a second. We got this circumstance where there's a pandemic moving through the world, and the mainstream authorities are saying, shelter in place, stay in your house. You're powerless, there's nothing you can do but wait for a vaccine, put on the mask, don't have contact with the people you love, don't do the stuff you love, don't go out and be in nature, don't get connected to your family members. Okay, in some circumstances, those measures might be appropriate, but the way they're getting applied across the whole spectrum of society is potentially contributing to the illness itself. Because there's a vicious cycle. When you're powerless, you can't do stuff you care about, you get less physical activity, you get less time outside, you get less connection with people that actually help give you a feeling of safety, security, and happiness. And all of those positive things you can do for yourself are part of what helps you stay healthy. And not doing them is a vicious cycle that feeds into making you more susceptible to be ill. So that's what I want to speak to today. How to break that vicious cycle and how to do stuff that actually helps you be healthier. So the way I look at it, there's kind of three main realms of how to understand your biology and physiology. And I call them 3 M's, okay? And so you can look at the diagram and there are 3 M's. There's mind, there's movement, there's metabolism. Okay? I'm going to unpack those in greater detail, but just the concept of what those are is they're like handles on your physiology. They're ways that you can grab on to the way your entire body works as one unit. All of your systems work as a unit. You have a mind-body unity. Your health is dependent on that integrated functioning of all these different aspects. Your immune system, your cardiovascular system, your mind, your emotions, your neurotransmitters of your brain that go every place in your body, communicate with your immune cells, communicate with your intestinal tract, absorption of nutrients, your muscles and your movement system that actually are endocrine organs. When you move and do stuff physically, you generate biochemistry that modulates your immune system, that modulates your emotions, that reduces stress, that enables your sleep. So these 3 areas are incredibly integrated and interconnected and incredibly important. And I just want to unpack them a little bit and talk about them. They're windows into your biology. They're ways that you can choose to enhance your ability to be healthy and to be well. You can choose to enhance your ability to deal with a potential infectious disease. And abundant research shows that in a lot of different realms. There are ways that you can empower yourself and not be helpless and hopeless. And for those of you who are waiting for a vaccine, a lot of these elements have to do with how your body responds to a vaccine. So let's unpack this a little bit. Let's talk about mind, okay, the one on the top. Mind is all of your thoughts and emotions and feelings and the way that that connects to you and to every bit of your body. And the most important part about this is mindset. And let me just emphasize it again. If you're in a passive, help me, fix me mindset, then you're basically putting yourself as helpless. And helpless is not good for you. And what I really want to encourage you to do, if you're not doing it already, is thinking about how to be proactive and how to learn and figure out how to do things for yourself that make you healthy, that make you stronger, because it has a profound impact. And I want to emphasize that impact, right? We talked about how helplessness increases stress. Well, what is stress? You have a stress response. Your stress response is get up and go. And you have a relaxation response, that's rest and digest. And they're meant to be in balance, right? You're meant to get up and go and do stuff. Stress is normal. Stress is not bad. If I have to go run for a bus, or if I'm dealing with some sort of difficult deadline, it gets me up and moves and focuses my mind so I can do and accomplish things in the world. That's good. Making love is stressful, okay? So is sports. But the issue is when it's chronic and it's purposeless and it's associated with negative emotions like helplessness, disconnection, depression, anxiety. That kind of stress is toxic. So it's really important to balance your stress response and relaxation response. There has been abundant research since the 1960s and 70s, not 60s, showing that chronic stress results in impaired immune responses. It results in people getting more infections, having decreased responses to viral exposure and to vaccine treatment, to development of chronic pain, insomnia, anxiety, depression, various kinds of cardiovascular problems, obesity, unhealthy eating behaviors. These are all stress related. When you're under chronic stress, you want to eat sugar and fat and simple carbohydrates because they feel good. It's comfort food. It's totally natural. But like I'll talk about in a minute, those things are poison to your immune system. So figuring out how to put yourself in a situation of I have control and there's things that I can do to help myself. Learning stress management if you are into that and open to that. I teach like a once a week free online thing. You can go to mindbodygroove.com. That URL will be in the notes below. And basically it's simple techniques for reducing your stress level, enhancing your sense of connection to what matters to you, to coming back home to yourself, to calm and clarity. Hugely important. All of that stuff about stress is related to where you're at emotionally. A lot of us have had really painful things happen in life. We've had loss, we've had grief, we've had trauma. Some of us have experienced abuse. All of that stimulates the core part of your brain that generates your stress response. If you're walking around with unresolved negative emotions, that's poison for you as well. And there are simple techniques to deal with that. Some of them are things you can learn on your own. There's therapy, there's support groups, there's lots you can do to learn how to actually work with your emotional state and heal those negative emotions that are otherwise continuing to pump out and cause your body to produce stress chemistry. And that stress chemistry affects your thinking and your behavior and the vicious cycle that takes you into a negative place. So really wanting to encourage that. Okay, movement. Your movement system, what is that? Your movement system on a certain level is your muscles and bones and joints and all the stuff that moves you around. It's your mobility, it's your structure. You were made to move, even if you have some degree of debility or disability because of illness or whatever other reason. The more you move, the better. Your movement system, your muscles are endocrine organs that produce chemistry that affects so many aspects of your health and well-being. When you do vigorous exercise, you generate an acute stress response. And in the short term, acute stress stimulates your immune system to better fight viruses, to produce better immune responses to vaccines. This has been studied over and over in other realms and infectious diseases like common colds and influenza and other viral infections, where people who have lots of the right amount of physical activity tend to have better immune responses, less infections, less severe infections, and better recovery. The people who tend to be most susceptible to corona, people with obesity, people who are elderly, the immune system is weakened in those states. And if you wait around for a vaccine, your body might not even respond to it if your immune system is depressed. Exercise on a regular basis enhances that immune vigilance so that your body can actually mount an immune response. It's important to know that too much exercise isn't good. The amount of exercise that professional athletes get, like for an hour or more of super intense exercise, actually impairs the immune system. So, the most common recommendations are 30 to 60 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. I want to mention there's other kinds of exercise because there's things that are more mindful exercise, whether it be yoga or Tai Chi, Pilates, other things that are more about creating a deep relaxation response. Most of the vigorous exercise studies that have been done have looked at how the stress response affects the immune system. But what they haven't looked at is how the stress response actually evokes the relaxation response. And so what you're doing with a relaxation exercise, like yoga or Tai Chi, is you're directly activating that relaxation response with all the biochemistry that's very healthy, that potentially modulates the immune system. It's an area that needs more study, for sure. What else about that? Yeah, I want to acknowledge that it can be hard to get the right kind of exercise, especially as we get into the winter time, especially if you're in a situation where there's social distancing and lockdown. But there are ways to do it. The key thing is find out what works for you. I recommend to most of my peeps that they do something outside. Do it away from people. Be connected to nature. Nature itself can be very healing. If you can't do it outside, do it inside. There's tons of free stuff online, ways you can learn aerobic exercise, Pilates, strength training, Tai Chi, yoga, stuff like that. It works. It helps. And find a way. Find a study buddy. Find someone you're going to do it with where you'll get online at the same time. Maybe you'll be on the phone with each other while you're both watching something on Facebook at the same time, or whatever it is that you want to do. But find some way to support yourself to do it on a scheduled, regular basis, at least 3 or 4 times a week. And I suspect you're going to see good results in how you feel and potentially positive results in how well your immune system works. Okay, the last area here, let's talk about metabolism. This is all your biochemistry. And when it comes down to it on a cellular level, when your body's fighting an infection, it's all about biochemistry. Your immune system is a biochemical factory that's interacting with all of your other biochemistry. And there are certain aspects to nutrition that have been shown over and over again to have a huge impact on how the body responds to potential infectious diseases. The biggest thing is what you eat. The standard Western diet, full of saturated fat, simple carbohydrates, and sugars, is toxic. It's poison. It impairs your immune system and makes it not function as well to fight potential viral infection. It also shifts other aspects of your immune system to create chronic inflammation, so that if you do get an infection, you're liable to develop a more robust immune response, which could be toxic and destructive to you. So simple stuff like eating more whole grains, eating healthy fats, looking for a balance of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, eating lots of colorful foods that have what we call phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are polyphenols, or those colored chemicals that are in brightly colored fruits and vegetables. Those sop up free radicals, those reduce immune activation. They're profoundly helpful to actually help your immune system function in a more balanced way. Let's talk about micronutrients. And this is where the whole Dr. Fauci thing is kind of funny, because he was quoted as saying, I take vitamin D and vitamin C and everything else is nonsense. Very disappointing. You know, when I was coming up in medical school and residency, we read Dr. Fauci's book. He was the editor of the big book of internal medicine. He's a brilliant scientist, but apparently he hasn't been studying nutrition science. He hasn't seen the science that's shown that zinc in animals and humans has profound effects on immune defenses. It helps the mucosa work better and reduce entry of viruses. It actually prevents viral replication. It modulates the immune system from having too much of a strong response. There's layers and layers of evidence supporting people that have healthy zinc levels in their body. And there's evidence that much of the world is zinc deficient. I don't know why he's not talking about that, but it's real science. There's more science about that than there is about a COVID-19 vaccine, which doesn't exist yet. You can see I'm a little passionate about this because I think they're really doing a disservice to you. So again, the right amount of zinc. Next thing, vitamin D. Vitamin D has evidence in COVID itself. A recent study came out over the summer 2020 that people with low vitamin D levels tend to get worse infection in the hospital with COVID-19. They tend to have worse outcomes from having low vitamin D. So you want your vitamin D to be in the middle range, healthy, robust, not too high, not too low, and you want to get it in a healthy way. Vitamin D comes from sunlight, it can come from supplementation, deeper topics for another time, but I want you to start looking for the right information about this stuff. Press your doctor about it, and if he doesn't know, press him or her. And if they can't tell you, maybe find another doctor. There are other micronutrients that are relevant, and again, this isn't the place to go into the details. Selenium, iron, other things that actually, there is scientific evidence that they are modulating and helping the immune system function well. And most of the research in all these areas, for sure, just to acknowledge, is done in other models of viral infection and looking at immune infection because the whole COVID thing's too new. So a lot of this is extension from other models of infection with various other viruses and influenza, but these are real relationships and they're things worth thinking about. So somehow our government agencies are spending billions of dollars on a vaccine that hasn't been developed and hasn't been proven that it can be developed. And they're not investing much that money and they're not investing much energy into helping the public figure out how to actually enhance their own health through lifestyle, through the mind-body system, through the movement system and the metabolic system. These are real science-based ways, common sense ways, things that you can do to not feel disempowered and out of control, things that you can do to step up to the plate to help the health of yourself and your family. I really strongly urge you to seek out good sources of information for these things and to learn how to actually take care of yourself, because it's not just about shifting and dealing with the situation of COVID. But the fact is that this could be an opportunity. It could be an opportunity for all of us to have a wake-up call. Because the fact is, part of the reason we're all getting sick from COVID, and part of the reason COVID rips through certain populations is because they're not healthy. And it's not to blame them, because health is really complicated, and lifestyle choices are really complicated. And I don't have judgment towards people who are old, or people who are obese, or people with diabetes or hypertension. It's complex. It's genetic, it's historical. But the fact is there's things that every one of us can do. And when you start to get proactive about your own health, your mental, your emotional health, as well as your physical health, it puts you in a better place to just be in life, to deal with the responsibilities and opportunities you have to make a difference in your life, to make a difference in the lives of your family. And I want to support you in that. So this is sort of the first video on this topic. Leave comments if there's more stuff you want to know. If you have comments, if you have questions, the intention is to try to dive more deeply into some of those topics. So if you want to get notified about future ones, you can actually click on the link below, and you can get on the mailing list so that you'll find out about new future videos. So I hope you enjoyed it. Share it if you like it if you like it, and I wish you all the best. You should have a healthy and productive end of 2020 and a healthy and productive 2020 and 2021 and onward. Wishing you all the best. Andrew David Shiller. Thanks a lot.